Police officers of Reddit, who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Like the video and subscribe right now, or this doggo will arrest you. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught after committing a crime. If the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. What state was this? Also, instead of eating it, why didn't he just flush it down the toilet? I'm not sure. I didn't feel like it was my place to question a convicted felon on his paper disposal tactics. My favorite was the guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, and then put it next to the night deposit box at a bank, and hung an out of order sign on the deposit box. All the businesses came along and dropped off their deposits in the mailbox. A guy I went to high school had been stealing from Walmart in a pretty clever way. He would grab video games, MP3 players, beer etc. and throw them away in a trash can in the garden section. The workers never checked the trash contents, and he would just wait, sometimes 5 hours, until they emptied the trash in the back dumpster and hop in to get his items. Once he took a cardboard box from a display inside, filled it with video games, a PS3, and extra controllers. He grabbed some tape and pens and drew all over the box and taped it up to make it look used and tossed it. An hour later he had a whole new PS3 and stack of games. I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scene. This guy had attached GPS to the bottom of people's cars who owned houses he wanted to rob. He did it to ensure they wouldn't be showing up while he was ransacking the place. I heard about one person that pulled a shoplifting scam on a large, popular and well-known US retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon product. To get one of those, I walked in with this stickers they used to put on returning merchandise. The sticker easily peeled off the product and damaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf, and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no, not without the original receipt. Dang it, and they walk out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls and cameras absolutely everywhere. I feel like I would remember what I had and hadn't recently put a sticker on. But perhaps I wouldn't be getting paid enough to worry too much about it. I remember an officer telling me about a B&D alarm he and his team responded to. No one was there to report the alarm. It must have been a security monitoring company that called. When police showed up, everything seemed normal. Most lights were off, and there was an employee still working. Explains he was there working late and must have set off an alarm. They almost believed him until he said UHH before saying the name of the company he worked for. After that it was downhill, but with a little more research he would have pretty much gotten away with it. I don't care how long I've been working for a company, I'd probably still say with my numbers too. I'll be sure not to loiter around any crime scenes now. There's one guy I recently dealt with who is on parole. I stopped him in my city after he was looking to buy drugs. Usually people come from all over to buy drugs and then leave. I issue him a warning and let him go, as it's pretty common, and he sang like a bird regarding the people he was trying to buy from. Anyway, the next day, I got a call from his parole officer who says he was alerted the guy was pulled over and wanted to verify that it was his guy that I stopped. I'm a little confused at first, but he goes on to say that the day before, he was scheduled to meet with him, but he had an excuse and bailed. His excuse was that he was in the hospital. Well, when he spoke with him the following day, he was able to provide documentation that he had entered the hospital day 1 and had left day 2. Well, I had stopped him at 115 in the morning, and after looking at the picture, it was 100% him. Turns out the guy had checked in then out of the hospital on day 1, then in and out again on day 2. He then rearranged half the paperwork to make it look like he was in the hospital overnight, which would make my cast up of him appear like I mixed him up with someone else, as well as give him a valid excuse to miss their meeting. Not sure what's gonna happen to that guy, but I thought it was pretty clever. This was in the late 90s early zeros. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story and got put on probation for a semester. So he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150K in return for about $8K in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. He should have played the long con. Cash out the $150K, apply to another school with the understanding he would pay cash, live somewhat frugally so the cash lasts, and use his story from the first school for his thesis to get his master's. Working in a home improvement store when younger, this guy came in, went to the snowblowers, took one and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it, but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says, "Okay, I'll be back," and wheels it off to car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. Couple places even helped him load it back into his car. Had a guy try that with the big expensive bedding sets at Sears back 20 years ago. He came up the escalator empty-handed, walked into the first aisle, and came out carrying the set. He said he wanted to return it. I said I needed a receipt, and when he asked why, I explained, "Well, sometimes we have issues with people coming up here, taking stuff off the shelves, and trying to return it." He got a bit squirrely, looked around kinda panicked, and left with it. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. Dead lol. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty, and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed, or that one rewired, because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that, and the police leaving, he tore down the wall. Had already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone know. He did all the hard work pretty well. Guy I went to high school with kept selling this gold necklace under a fake ID to jewelry stores. When he had cash in his hand from the sale, he'd flash a real looking airsoft gun and demand the necklace back. Worked about twice until the third guy knew what the deal was. If someone tried selling this one particular necklace, shop owner went in the back to reference an appraisal book and just called the cops. Funny part was he got like a year for the robberies, but using the fake gun added 5 years to the sentence. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison became a comedian when he got out. One of his stories: finds a building, goes in, chooses a floor, and transforms the exit door into an extra apartment. Puts the apartment number, fake lock, welcome rug, etc. Puts an iPhone for sale. The person comes to buy it. He opens the door in a shower robe and says, "Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna count the money," and poof, he's gone from the exit stairs. This seems like exactly the kind of crime a comedian would commit. A friend of my brother moved to Israel where for a period of time it was / acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. Officer, Costco? What is Costco? Friend, it's the state I'm from. Officer, that sounds made up. Friend, there are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Officer, I guess not. Friend, well, I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Reminds me of a family friend of mine. Very funny Australian with an absolutely horrendous Boggan accent. Well, late 80s, he's driving through Texas and runs a red light and is immediately pulled over by a 250-pound Texan police officer with an equally horrendous accent. The way the story goes, this man is obviously not the brightest chapter. So our friend, when asked about running the red light, gets very apologetic and explains that he gets easily confused because in Australia you know how things are veer down there, red means go and green means stop. The cop actually let this man go with a warning, I did not know that. Well, in America, red means stop, so don't make this mistake again. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered super bike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was to drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a slidder hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it, so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass, and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up, and he explains that he'd just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down high name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I?